The Galactic Council had existed for 3 million years before humanity even learned to make fire. When the first human radio signals reached the stars in the 21st century, the ancient species looked upon Earth with amusement. They called humans the infant species and expected nothing from them. They had lived for 2 million years. They had conquered their first star system before humans climbed down from trees. The crystalline had witnessed the birth and death of 1,000 civilizations. To them, humans were merely bobbies taking their first steps into a universe they could never understand. First contact happened in the year 2157. A diplomatic vessel arrived in Earth's orbit, and the galaxy expected humans to bow down in gratitude. They expected humans to worship these ancient beings as gods. Instead, the human ambassador shook the diplomat's hand and said, "Nice to meet you. Let's talk business." They were confused. Every other young species had trembled before their advanced technology. Every other young species had begged for protection and guidance. But humans simply smiled and asked what they wanted to trade. This was the first sign that humanity was different. The Council granted humanity a small corner of space, expecting them to stay quiet and learn from their elders. They gave humans outdated technology, believing the infant species would take centuries to understand it. Human engineers took apart the technology in 3 months. Within 2 years, they had improved it. Within 5 years, they had created something entirely new that made the engineers nervous. The Council began to watch humanity more carefully. The Empire was the first to test humanity's strength. They were a warrior species with 8 arms and armored skin that could stop most weapons. They had conquered 47 species throughout their history and had never lost a war. When they demanded that humanity surrender 3 colony worlds, everyone expected humans to obey. The fleet arrived with 200 warships, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. The human response was simple. They said no. The Battle of New Shanghai became legendary across the galaxy. Humanity had only 30 ships against 200. Their technology was inferior. Their experience was nothing compared to the ancient warriors they faced. But humans had something they did not understand. They had creativity born from desperation. They had a refusal to accept defeat. When the commander ordered the attack, he expected the battle to last less than 1 hour. It lasted 3 days. Human pilots flew their smaller ships in patterns that confused the targeting systems. They used their own asteroids as weapons, pulling them into the path of enemy vessels. They modified their weapons during the battle itself, finding new frequencies that could pierce armor. When one human ship was damaged beyond repair, its crew flew it directly into a carrier, destroying both vessels. They had never seen such behavior. In their culture, survival was everything. In human culture, some things were worth dying for. They retreated with only 60 ships remaining. They had lost more vessels in 3 days than they had lost in the previous 1,000 years. The galaxy took notice. The infant species had drawn blood from one of the oldest warrior races in existence. The Galactic Council called an emergency meeting. Something had to be done about humanity. The proposed containment. They wanted to surround human space with monitoring stations and prevent further expansion. The suggested education, hopping to teach humans to be more peaceful like the other civilizations. The demanded vengeance, wanting to destroy humanity before they became too powerful. But as the ancient species debated, humanity continued to grow. They built more ships. They trained more soldiers. They developed new weapons that made the old ones look like toys. The true test came when the void arrived. No one knew where the void came from. Some believed they came from another galaxy. Others thought they came from a dimension beyond normal space. The void were living darkness, creatures of shadow and hunger that consumed everything they touched. They had destroyed entire civilizations in the distant past, and now they had returned. The galaxy faced extinction. The ancient species did what they had always done. They retreated to their home worlds and built massive defensive systems. They prepared to survive the storm and wait for the void to pass. They had done this before, hiding in their fortresses while younger species were consumed. It was the way things had always been. The strong survived by being patient, but humanity did not retreat. Admiral Sarah stood before the combined human fleet and gave a speech that would echo through history. She said that humanity had spent its entire existence fighting. They had fought animals, nature, disease, and each other. They had survived ice ages and plagues and world wars. They had crawled from the mud and reached for the stars because they refused to accept limits. She said that humanity would not hide while others suffered. She said that humanity would face the void and teach them what fear truly meant. The other species watched in disbelief as the human fleet flew toward the void instead of away from it. 300 human warships moved into the darkness while the ancient civilizations cowered behind their shields. They called it suicide. They called it madness. They called it the foolishness of children. But humanity called it duty. The first engagement with the void shattered everything the galaxy believed about warfare. Human weapons, designed for physical enemies, passed through the shadow creatures without effect. Thousands of human soldiers died in the first hour as the void consumed ship after ship. Any other species would have retreated. Any other species would have accepted defeat and tried to escape. But humans adapted. They studied the void even as they died. They recorded everything, sending data back to Earth with every sacrifice. Human scientists worked without sleep for days. They discovered that the void were not immune to everything. Light of specific frequencies could hurt them. Energy patterns that disrupted their shadow forms could destroy them. Within 1 week, humanity had developed new weapons. Within 2 weeks, they were pushing the void back. The galaxy watched in amazement as the infant species did what no ancient civilization had dared to try. The Battle of the Crimson Nebula became the turning point. Admiral led her remaining 150 ships into the heart of the void swarm. They used the nebula's natural radiation to enhance their weapons. They fought for 17 days without rest, rotating crews in shifts while others slept in their combat suits. Human soldiers fought hand-to-hand with shadow creatures, using modified light grenades to clear corridors on infected stations. They died by the thousands, but they did not stop. On the 18th day, the void began to retreat. For the first time in recorded history, the darkness fled from light. Human ships pursued them across 3 star systems, refusing to let them escape, refusing to let them regroup. The galaxy had never seen such relentless aggression. The galaxy had never seen such terrible determination. By the end of the campaign, the void had been driven from known space, and humanity had lost 2/3 of their fleet. The Galactic Council summoned humanity to their Great Hall for the first time. The ancient species looked upon the human delegates with new eyes. These were not helpless children anymore. These were warriors who had done what 3 million years of civilization had failed to do. The representative asked how humanity had found the courage to attack the void. The human ambassador smiled and gave an answer that confused them all. He said, "We were scared, we were terrified, but we went anyway." The concept was alien to the ancient species. They fought when victory was certain. They hid when defeat was likely. They calculated odds and made logical decisions. But humans fought when they were afraid. They fought when victory seemed impossible. They fought because they believed that some things mattered more than survival. The ancient species realized they had made a terrible mistake. They had not been dealing with an infant species. They had been dealing with something entirely new. The years that followed changed everything. Other species began to ask humanity for training. Young warriors from the Empire traveled to human military academies to learn their strange tactics. Scientists studied human psychology, trying to understand how such a short-lived species could produce such fierce determination. Those who had watched civilizations rise and fall for millions of years declared that they had never seen anything like humanity. Humanity did not become conquerors. They did not use their new reputation to dominate others. Instead, they became protectors. When the void returned 50 years later, humanity led a coalition of species against them. When the mechanical harvesters threatened the outer colonies, human fleets were the first to respond. When civil war nearly destroyed the civilization, human diplomats helped negotiate peace. The youngest species had become the guardians of the galaxy. Historians would later debate why humanity rose so quickly. Some said it was their short that made them act with urgency. Some said it was their emotional nature that drove them to impossible achievements. Some said it was their long history of warfare that had prepared them for any conflict. But the truth was simpler than all of these theories. Humanity had grown up in a dangerous world. They had spent their entire existence fighting for survival against predators, disasters, and each other. Every generation faced challenges that could have destroyed them. But instead of making them cautious, this history had made them bold. Instead of teaching them to hide, it had taught them to fight. While the ancient species had grown comfortable in their power, humanity had remained hungry. They had remained desperate. They had remained alive in ways that immortal civilizations had forgotten. The statue of Admiral Sarah now stands in the center of the Galactic Council chamber. The inscription beneath it reads, "She taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important." Representatives from 100 species pass by it every day. They look upon the face of a human warrior and remember the lesson that humanity taught the galaxy. The ancient species had believed that age brought wisdom and strength. They had believed that young civilizations could never match those who had existed for millions of years. But humanity proved them wrong. Humanity showed that youth could bring energy, creativity, and a fire that old civilizations had lost. They showed that sometimes the youngest child at the table could grow up to be the greatest warrior in the room. The galaxy is safer now because humanity reached for the stars. The darkness fears the light that humans carry. The monsters that lurk between stars know that human ships patrol the void. And somewhere on a small blue planet at the edge of the galaxy, children look up at the night sky and dream of adventures among the stars, never knowing that their ancestors transformed the universe forever. The youngest species became the greatest warriors not because they were the strongest or the oldest They became the greatest because they never stopped fighting, never stopped hopping, and never stopped believing that tomorrow could be better than today. And in a universe that had grown tired and afraid, that simple belief changed everything.